Hello, this is Ryan Kingsline. In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can build hands and fingers with z-spheres or with a z-sphere model. The first way we're going to take a look at this is creating just an arm, hand, and fingers from a z-sphere model. When I work with z-spheres, I always turn symmetry on. Then I will always go to the top of this z-sphere, get these red dots till they turn green, snap together. Click and draw out one at the top, and then do the exact same thing for the bottom. This is probably the most important step when creating z-sphere models. If you do not create a z-sphere at the bottom, I'm going to press Alt, click on the z-sphere to delete it. Then when you press A, you get this kind of empty shape. If we turn display properties double on, you can see that by not having a z-sphere on the bottom, it has made this hollow. So I will always go in, create the top and the bottom. Then when I press A on the keyboard, I'll get a z-sphere mesh that looks like this. Now we're going to assume that this is maybe the wrist, the hand, and then we're going to put fingers along here. So first thing I'm going to do for the fingers is turn symmetry off, and then I'm going to just draw them out, making sure to keep this line in my mind. I draw one out. You can see that line has changed, but I'm remembering that it goes this way. So I'm just going to click out another one, and you'll see the line has corrected itself. Also, I have local on, which makes my rotation a little bit easier. Be mindful of this skeleton. You don't want to click on that to create a new z-sphere. It'll complicate things. So you want that off to the side slightly. And so far we've created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's our 5 fingers. Now if we press A on the keyboard, you'll see that it gets all messed up. If we turn frame on, you can see you've got one coming out of here. It looks like you got some intersecting polygons and things like that. The way that you solve this is very simple. You go to Adaptive Skin, iRes, and you set that to 3. That's the only thing you need to worry about, is to set that to 3. I rarely adjust MBR, MC, or MP. Those end up changing the shape of the model, which is something I'm going to do with the sculpting tools. So now the next thing that you have to concern yourself with when sculpting hands and fingers is where each one of these fingers is coming out of in terms of the polygon flow. So in this case, we're going to say this is the thumb. These are the fingers. So I'm going to take this index finger and make it so that it is coming out of this row of polygons right here. So I'm going to press A, go into Move, click on that z-sphere and just move it. Press A again, and there we go. Now I might just redistribute these slightly. And we're in good shape. Now the next trick is to go back into Draw. Then I press and hold Shift and just click on these z-spheres. And that will create a new z-sphere that is exactly the same size. The thumb I'm going to scale up a little bit bigger, back into Draw, and click. So now if I press A, it could look like a chicken. That's okay. We're going to just move that z-sphere up for the index, middle, ring finger, and the pinky, and pull the thumb out. Press A on the keyboard, and there you go. Now this might look strange, or like the model suffering from elephantitis of the hand, but we are going to fix all of that in the sculpt. So what's important to be mindful of here when we're working with z-spheres is that they put the geometry there for us. They put the clay on the armature. And then it's our job to reshape it. And because they put the clay on there in an automatic way, just we're giving it a little few instructions to say, put this piece here, put that piece there, put this piece here. It's going to do it in the same way every single time as best as it can, but in the case of hands, it's not going to do it the way we eventually want. But ultimately, that's a really small problem because it's really easy to just go in and say press shift and smooth out the hand. So we're not going to do that quite yet, the sculpting part. We've got a few more things to do in the model itself, such as put knuckles in there. So to insert a Z-sphere in a chain, I just click on these linking spheres. So it'll be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 2. And then 1. Going to move. Press A on the keyboard. And what I'm looking for here is polygon distribution. So there's a lot of polygons in the hands. And now we're getting more polygons in the fingers because we put these Z-spheres in there. And I'd say that's about good enough, but I'm going to do a little bit more modifications. I'm going to shrink the size of the pinky. And to do that, I press and hold Alt and click on these linking spheres, which is going to just take it all down a size. And then I think all the fingers are suffering from that. It doesn't hurt to have the fingers smaller because you're just going to add volume as you sculpt. Thumb, definitely too big. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Now, let's get this thumb coming out of the right place. So do I want the thumb coming out of here, or do I want it coming out of here? And we can just look at our hand to get a sense of where the thumb's natural position really is. And I'd say we could easily leave it right there, and then we'll just end up bending it a bit. We could also move it over, and then it'll come out of here. We have to be mindful of what's going to happen in these places. These are going to be problematic sculpting areas, so we want to make sure that we don't cause too much trouble to begin with. And my own thought is that we should just leave it like this, and then in the sculpt we should move that thumb forward. But I do want to get in, and I do want to rotate these fingers and give it a little bit more life, instead of it being just these straight fingers. So one thing that's really cool with fingers is this. We can say just add a little bit of gesture like that. Again, I'm not worrying about the shape. I'm going to sculpt these fingers later on with the clay brush and all of that stuff. I just want to give them some life. Maybe move that back a bit, and we can change all of this with transpose later on. Let me move that down, then into rotate, and that's going to tilt more forward, and forward. Okay, so I think that's looking about good. I'm looking at my hand right now to see if I want to alter the polygon flow at all. The thumb is of particular importance, but we're just going to treat this as a simple sculpt. So let's not get too carried away with anything. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is move these polygons around a little bit. Give us a little bit more room for the wrist and the forearm. And there we go. I would say at this stage that is a fairly good hand for us to start with. And remember, all we did to solve the intersection problem is set iRes to 3. That's the only thing you have to do, and this z-sphere layout will work perfectly. This z-sphere layout will also work perfectly when you're working with a full body like this. So we're going to take a look at that in a second. But first, let me show you what you should expect to be able to get sculpt-wise out of this. Let me just show you a fairly complete workflow. So our z-spheres have put the clay on the model, or on the armature, and now it's our job to sculpt. So I'm going to press Make Adaptive Skin. I'm going to select the model that has the prefix of skin to the name. That is a polygon mesh. At this point, it is not a z-sphere mesh. I do not have adaptive skin here. If I press A, it does not go back to the z-sphere model. And now these are completely separate models. The z-sphere model is separate from the polygon mesh model. Any changes I make to the z-sphere will not propagate here, and vice versa. So if as you're sculpting you realize there is some intersection problem, you'll have to go back to the z-sphere model, fix the problem there, and then make an adaptive skin again and resculpt. So at this stage you want to be very mindful of what you have and what's working. So now, as I showed you earlier, the simplest way to adjust for this round golf ball appearance is to simply smooth it. You can see in a matter of 5 seconds we've solved the major problem with the z-spheres. So let's turn frame off. And now let's go around with move and just do some shaping on the forearm to get that the way that we want. Okay, just thinning that wrist up a bit. And you can see I'm really flattening that arm. So this is one plane, this is another plane, this is another plane here and there. So I'm keeping it as boxed as possible. And that's just a way for me to keep the form for as long as possible, just to keep things a little bit easier for me to understand. Now, one problem that you will have with a mesh like this is you'll have more polygons in the hands than you do in the forearm. And that's going to be continued when we go over to the full body mesh. Though if we create the fingers with z-spheres, we are always going to have this too many polygons in the hands, less in the forearms. A lot of times that's completely an acceptable dilemma to be in, but I'll show you one other way that you can create fingers on a z-sphere mesh. So let's continue with the sculpt real quick, and just to show you how simple this process really is going to be. So again, the hand is a great thing to sculpt because you've got one right there with you all the time, and you don't have to pay it. So just checking out things, looking. There's one thing I want to really mention about fingers that gets missed in some people's sculpts. So let's turn frame off. And there'll be some things to adjust. Alright, I'm not going to do a complete sculpt here with you guys, but I do want to show you how we can get this thumb and the palm area here kind of pushed around to make it a little bit more curved in the way that a thumb does. So I look at it about 3/4 view, I turn lasso on, I press and hold control, and I make a selection like that, which basically represents the thumb and palm and some of the back. Then I control tap outside of the model to invert that, go into rotate, draw an action line from here to the tip of the thumb, look at it from a slight top view, and just rotate that around. And so that's essentially what we're going for, but I don't want this problem up here. So we can press Control and tap on the model, which is going to blur that out. However, might blur it out too much. We'll see. You can also just draw out an action line like this and see what I get when rotating it along this axis. So I kind of like that. We'll go here, and then I might switch to move and move that forward a touch. Now our job is to go into draw, divide, and at this point you have basic clay on the armature, and now you have to go in and sculpt. And as I do that, I'm always working with a clay brush to kind of get things rapidly placed. But one thing with clay brush you have to be mindful of is with thin fingers, if your brush size is too big, it's going to pull the back in as well. So be mindful of your brush size and try not to get that too big to begin with. The other thing you can do is come in with inflate and say inflate areas like this. It's not a bad brush to be using for this. And there'll be a lot of sculpting to do. But one thing I really want to mention is that when you come in to do the knuckles, don't forget that the front of the palm goes forward and the back actually it works at about an axis like this. The knuckles are somewhere back here. And then I'll go in with inflate in a situation like this. Just pull that together, smooth it, pull it together, and inflate. So we'll leave the hands in the most basic sense, just like this for you. But you can see that comes from a very basic Z-sphere mesh. Now, our job will be to make this much better, to sculpt this, but that's what we want to do inside of ZBrush. This mesh gave us just the beginnings of an armature for us to kind of work with and develop it from that point forward. So now let's take a look at what happens to a full body when we add Z-sphere fingers. Alright, here's our Z-sphere body. A very simple Z-sphere body. The only thing we are worrying about is gesture and polygon distribution, which means I might go in and say add some more in the legs for better polygon distribution. And then let's add fingers. When I do this, I'm going to turn local on. It's going to make my life easier. I'm also going to scale up that hand to make my life easier as well. And I'll only work on one side because I have symmetry on. So the other side is going to take care of itself. But first, let's preview the mesh and take a look at the hands and where the polygons are flowing. So we want to follow this midline. We don't want to work across the midline. We don't want to be doing this, because that's going to affect your polygon distribution. Let's set our iRes to 3. If we turn frame on, you'll see we're working across at a diagonal. We don't want to be doing that. We want to be working straight along these lines. So let's undo that. And we will create 1, 2. I'm mindful of that skeleton. I don't want to be clicking on that bone. So we've got 4 and 5. Which is exactly what we want. Now if we press A, you'll see everything's all set up. We've got our iRes set to 3, so we've got our polygons flowing in the right way. This is going to be our thumb. It's going to be facing forward. This will be the back of the hand, and then the front of the, the palm of the hand. Alright, now the only thing we've got to modify here is we've got to pull that pinky forward. So into move, let's move that a touch, and let's move that a touch. Press A, we're getting better. Okay, if this happens, remember, press Control Z, and then you can press F to frame it again. Tends to happen when you're working on really small parts, zoomed in. This is not what we want to be seeing. So let's scale that. Alright, we've got this going a little bit better. Okay, now we're going to go into Draw. Press Shift click, Shift click, Shift click, Shift click, and Shift click. And so it looks strange, I absolutely agree, but that's what we want in this beginning state. Then we are going to simply move those fingers down, 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 and we'll move them a little more than that. That's the middle finger, the ring, and then the pinky, and we'll pull the thumb out like that. Press A, check our progress. So what we're looking for here is, are they all coming out of that row of polygons right there? Are they all right next to each other, and do they have a row of polygons between the thumb and the index? That's important. If they do, then we're in good shape. We can now add the knuckles. Move them around. And let's see, I added those a little too close. Okay, now you can see right off the bat that there's a lot more polygons in these fingers than there are in the rest of the body. So as this model divides up to 1, 2, 4 million, or 8 million, if you're at 8 million, it's very likely there's going to be at least 1 million polygons in the hand, in probably one hand alone. So that's going to cause you some problems later on, in that where you want the most of your polygons is in the face, but they're now down here. So this is a perfectly acceptable way to create a model. The demo soldier that ships with ZBrush actually came from ZSpheres along these lines, although his face was edge looped as well. But what I'm going to do is now is show you a different way of doing that. So let me load the default base in. So there are no fingers here. Polygon distribution is pretty good. And so let's see what we can get out of this. To add fingers, I'm going to actually use the polygon mesh's edge loop control. So first, I have to press Make Adaptive Skin. Select the Skin ZSphere Human Base. It's no longer a ZSphere. There's no adaptive skin. If I press A, nothing happens. This is the ZSphere base here. So any changes I make to the polygon mesh now do not connect to the ZSphere. They are absolutely disconnected. So now we've got our polygon mesh. In our Geometry tab, we have something called Edge Loop, and that's what I'm going to use to create the hands. So let me do one hand at a time. I press Control Shift. I leave lasso on for this. Control Shift, and I drag out a selection. Actually, let's do both hands. Control Shift, I'm going to click on the hands. Control Shift, click and drag to invert that. So that will give me just the arms and hide everything else. Then I'm going to create another group for the hands. And to do that, I'm going to press Control Shift, drag out this rectangle, or this lasso. And then I'm going to, well, we'll just leave it like that. Yes, perfect. Now I'll go Polygroup, and I'll say Group Visible. And then these hands will be different. Let me try grouping them again to make sure that the color changes. The color didn't need to be different, but this way it'll be easier for you to see. Control Shift, click on the group to isolate the group. Alright, we've got that done. Now, what I'm going to do is add fingers in each one of these polygon faces, right along here, or let's say right along here. Let me see if my lower subdivision level, no. Lower subdivision level won't work. I need to do this. So this will be index, middle, ring, pinky, and then the thumb's going to come out of this area. Now we have to isolate these polygons. So let's see. This is going to be, what do we say? The middle finger, ring, pinky, index right there. So now I've got to isolate certain polygons. To do that, I'm going to make sure I go into the transform palette and I turn point select on. That's just going to make my selection process a little easier. What point select does is it will take just the point I click, and that, or let me say that another way. If I make a selection and just this little vertex is involved in it, then the entire face will be hidden or shown. Whereas with point select off, you have to actually include over half of the polygon itself in there. So now I'm going to try to isolate just this. So I'm looking to isolate these two right here. Control Shift, then I release Shift. That's what I want. Now, just so I can make this really obvious, I'm going to turn Group Visible on for that so that that's a separate group. Alright, so I want to be isolating that group. Now let's hide this. Let's look at that and hide that. We press Edge Loop, and you'll see we get this error that says that it may be partially modified only while the lowest subdivision level is active. No problem. Just going to delete my lower because there's not enough information here. So here I'll delete lower, and then we'll repeat. In fact, it looks like we got a bit of a straggler. So let's remove that, make sure that's grouped differently, and I will edge loop that. So that's the edge loop that we want. And then what we're going to be able to do is pull that finger out. And I can do that with an action line and transpose and just pull straight down. And we're going to repeat that process for each one of the fingers. So now let's pull out for this area as well. One thing that really showed me, though, let's make sure symmetry is on, is that it would be better if I thin the hand down now. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, now I'm going to show just the hand here, and then Control Shift, and I will isolate everything else. Control Shift, release Shift, Control Shift, release Shift, and edge loop, Control Shift click to show it all, and then Control Shift. Just want to look at just that. Then I want to hide all of this. And then we have to repeat for the pinky. And edge loop. Then let's pull the thumb out of here. Okay, and now we're in good shape. So now the next thing that I would do is move on to the other side, do those fingers, but I'm going to, for the purposes of this tutorial, stay focused on one. Now, I can go into Move, ZBrush 2 habit. I can make sure that the Move brush is selected, and then I can be pulling these fingers out, but as you see, it gets to be a bit of an issue with what you're selecting. You're going to have to lower your draw size, and really at this point you're getting into the whole vertice pushing and pulling thing, which is not something that I want to be doing, and it's why I'm in ZBrush to begin with, is so I don't have to do that. That's not really my idea of fun. So let's just get a little bit more organized about it, and what we're going to do is just isolate as much as possible each one of those fingers. Okay, so there we go. And then I'm going to isolate that middle area. Isolate the middle area. Yes, and get rid of all of that. Let's make sure that that's not selected. And then I say group visible, and that will group them all one color, so I can select them. Now I can press Control, click on the canvas, mask all of them. Then I can press Control Shift, click on the canvas to show everything, and then simply invert that mask. Control click. And now move, pull them out. I'm going to mask this off temporarily so that I can pull the fingers down. And then I can return to this one. Let's mask all of that and just pull that out slightly. We'll have some sculpting to do to adjust their shape and all of that stuff, but we were able to pull out fingers. Now let's go back here. I'm just going to say divide this model once, which will make things a little bit easier. And then just smooth out sections. Turn frame off. Going to move all of that back, and start to begin the process of sculpting those fingers without all of the extra polygons that were being created via the other method. So here, if we turn frame on, polygon distribution is going to be a little bit better. But we will have some things to consider in terms of sculpting and getting the right shape. So you'll have to spend some time, seeing how this works for you. In these areas where the z-spheres are really close to each other, you can simply press inflate. Sorry, the polygons are very close to each other. You can press inflate and just inflate along to see where you can go from there. You can also smooth them out to kind of figure out more what's going on, get more space in between them, lower the subdivisions, but you're going to have to be very mindful of what happens right in these connecting areas. So I'm going to press move, or I should say select the move brush. Just make sure that these are far enough down there. And while we saved on polygons down near the hands, and we kept our polygon distribution very light, we are going to have other things that we kind of have to address and deal with. And that is some disruption in the polygon flow, where the index and the pinky are flowing into each other, both front and back. So that will cause a few issues, but not too much. And you'll make your own judgments on what works for you and whether or not that's an acceptable dilemma. But there's all kinds of trade-offs. If you want to model your hands inside of another 3D app with edge looping and extrusion and all these other kinds of tools, that's perfectly legit. The purpose of this tutorial is simply to show you how you can use ZBrush's tools to do this if you are not familiar with those other options. So that concludes this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed, and happy ZBrushing.